The station clock chimed 12 times, each strike resonating through the empty air, a solemn reminder of the passing time. Each clang echoed through the desolate hall, marking the death of another day. The vast emptiness of the station seemed to amplify the sound, making it almost unbearable. She was alone, swallowed by the cavernous station, the only soul foolish enough to brave the last train out. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of her coat. A gust of wind rattled the windows at the far end of the platform, making Lila jump. The sudden noise was a stark contrast to the stillness that had settled around her. The yellow glow of the platform lights seemed to shrink in the face of the encroaching darkness beyond the glass. It was as if the night itself was trying to swallow the light. Her breath formed a fleeting cloud in the cold air. Where was the train? The minutes felt like hours as she waited, her anxiety growing with each passing second. With a screech of metal on metal, the train arrived, pulling to a stop with a tired sigh. The sound was almost a relief, breaking the tension that had built up in the silence. Each carriage was dark, windows reflecting the dim lights of the platform like empty eyes. The train seemed almost ghostly, a relic from another time. Fear coiled in Lila's stomach, whispering doubts in her ear. She hesitated for a moment, questioning her decision to board. Still, she boarded, picking a seat near the middle of the carriage. The seat felt cold and unwelcoming, but she had no other choice. Lila was alone in the carriage. She drummed her fingers on the armrest, her only company the rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks. The sound was almost hypnotic, a steady beat that matched the pounding of her heart. The world outside was a black blur, punctuated by the occasional flickering light of a distant house. It was as if the train was moving through an endless void, a journey with no destination. A wave of unease washed over her. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that she was being watched. The air inside the carriage felt thick, heavy. Each breath seemed to take more effort, as if the atmosphere itself was pressing down on her. She could have sworn she heard a whisper, a soft sigh that seemed to come from the seat behind her. It was so faint, she wondered if she had imagined it. Turning her head, she peered into the darkness. The shadows seemed to shift and move, playing tricks on her eyes. Nothing. She tried to shake off the feeling, telling herself it was just nerves. But the unease lingered, a persistent whisper in the back of her mind. The last train, the empty carriage, the oppressive darkness. It was enough to make anyone jumpy. Every creak and groan of the train seemed amplified in the silence. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. A nagging thought that refused to be silenced. She was not alone, she could feel it. The presence was there, lurking just out of sight. The train rattled onwards, each click of the wheels another step further into the unknown. The night was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of the train. Suddenly, a movement at the far end of the carriage caught Lila's eye. She squinted through the dim light, trying to make out the figure that seemed to be lurking in the shadows. A figure had emerged from the shadows, shrouded in the darkness of a heavy coat. The coat seemed to absorb the light, making the figure appear even more menacing. He sat down in the last seat, his face obscured by the low light and the wide brim of his hat. The air around him seemed to grow colder, as if he carried the chill of the night with him. Lila couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her, his gaze boring into her back like a physical touch. It was as if his eyes were piercing through the darkness, directly at her. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, wishing she had chosen a different carriage. The sense of unease was growing, making her heart race faster with each passing second. The man remained motionless, a statue carved from shadow and dread. His stillness was unnerving, adding to the oppressive atmosphere in the carriage. The silence between them was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of the train and the pounding of Lila's heart. Each beat echoed in her ears, amplifying her fear. Why hadn't she gotten off at the last stop? The question gnawed at her, filling her with regret and a sense of impending doom. The train lurched violently, plunging the carriage into darkness. Lila gasped, clutching at the armrest as she was thrown forward. Panic surged through her, choking her like icy fingers around her throat. Where was the light? Why wasn't the train moving? As suddenly as it had begun, the darkness lifted. Lila blinked, her eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light that flooded back into the carriage. She looked around, her heart pounding in her chest. The man was gone. The carriage was empty, save for Lila and her racing thoughts. Had he been real, or was her mind playing tricks on her, conjuring phantoms in the darkness? A cold shiver ran down her spine. She had to get off this train. She had to get off this train.